Welcome to Unveiling the Truth,
where we unveil the truth about the Catholic Church one fact at a time.
I'm Nefer.
And I'm Nellie, and today we are going to be unveiling the truth about anti-patriarchal ideas and how it destroys the family.
So without further ado, let's go unveil the truth.
So you might be wondering why the random topic of the anti-patriarchal ideas and how they destroy the family. So actually what we're going to do is the next 4 videos we are making is going to be a series of what destroys the family. And the first one we are going to cover is the anti-patriarchal ideas. The next one is going to be the LGBTQ community, contraception, and abortion. Today we're covering the anti-patriarchal ideas and kind of just going over what they are and how they do lead to the destruction of a good family.
Right. So basically we should have a question to keep in mind while we're going through this series, which is why the obsession with abolishing the nuclear family? Because all of these things, why we decided to unite them together, especially in a very interesting month during in society, is that these all work together, either knowingly or unknowingly, they work together to destroy the nuclear family. And that's just to keep in mind all that question of why this obsession with wanting to do that as we present our information as to how these different topics.
So like through the next 4 videos, keep that in mind, that's kind of what we're centered around, is why the destruction of the family.
Yeah. And at the end of the 4th episode of this series, we'll answer that based on what we've looked at.
And we're going to try to connect everything together for you so you understand.
Right. So just to start you off with this quote to keep in mind that I think applies to all of these, could you read from number 24 of Pope John Paul II's encyclical Evangelium Vitae?
It says, "It is at the heart of the moral conscience that the eclipse of the sense of God and of man, with all its various and deadly consequences for life, is taking place. It is a question above all of the individual conscience, as it stands before God in its singleness and uniqueness. But it is a question, in a certain sense, of the moral conscience of society. In a way, it too is responsible, not only because it tolerates or fosters behavior contrary to life, but also because it encourages the culture of death, creating and consolidating actual structures of sin which go against life. The moral conscience, both individual and social, is today subjected, also as a result of the penetrating influence of the media, to an extremely serious and mortal danger, that of confusion between good and evil, precisely in relation to the fundamental right to life."
Right.
A large part of contemporary society looks sadly like that humanity which Paul describes in his letter to the Romans. It is composed of men by who their wickedness suppressed the truth, 1:18, having denied God and believing that they can build the earthly city without him. They became futile in their thinking, so that their senseless minds were darkened, 1:21. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, 1:22, carrying out works deserving of death, and they not only do them, but approve those who practice them, 1:32. When conscience is bright lamp of the soul, Matthew 6:22-23 calls evil good and good evil, is 5:20. It is already on the path to the most alarming corruption and the darkest moral blindness.
Yeah. So that was taken directly from one of St. Pope John Paul II's encyclicals, directed up to the family and about, being open to life. And so that's just something to keep in mind as we go through these topics. They're going to be very heavy topics, but important ones to talk about, especially in today's society. So first, for those of you who do not know what we mean by anti-patriarchal ideas, just a brief explanation as to what this is. Basically, it's the idea that the patriarchy, or the system in which the man is the head of the household, is an oppressive system. It oppresses women, it oppresses children, and that the patriarchy was rooted in this thing called toxic masculinity.
God forgive us for saying that word.
And toxic masculinity is the idea that masculinity in itself is just inherently toxic. So it goes beyond condemning abusive and aggressive men, like individual people, and saying, hey, you know what, you're not doing something right.
Exactly.
It's saying all men, because you're masculine, you have inherent evil and toxicity within you.
Right.
And so they're saying that patriarchy is just the result of toxic masculinity, and in order to create more equality and fairness and happiness and whatever.
And they're like taking away the voice of the man too.
Right, you have to take away the voice of the man and overthrow the patriarchy, get rid of this system in which the man is the head of the household. So these anti-patriarchal ideas, as we're calling them, have Marxist roots. So they were proposed by a communist sympathizer, or I mean, you could even say that he founded communism.
He was a psychologist too.
Yeah, Karl Marx. And this took shape as a way to combat the evils of capitalism, because he tied capitalism and patriarchy together. And capitalism is just kind of like the current system we have now, where, there's like a business profit thing. That's more of like economics, but he tied patriarchy to the capitalist system that we have in most Western countries now. And so in the eyes of Marxists and Marxist sympathizers, in order to get rid of how evil capitalism was, one of the keys was overthrowing the patriarchy. So what exactly does Marxism say about the patriarchy? This is taken from a quote by a priest by the name of Father Linus Clovis of Family Life International, and he said these words at a 2019 UK Catholic conference called Handing on the Deposit of Faith. These are his words. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the founders of Marxism, both recognized that the natural family, based on marriage between a man and a woman, is the basic cell of society whose existence was a guarantee of order, stability, and morality in the society. They therefore argued that it was necessary to ideologically attack and subvert the family as an institution, since they deemed it a place of class antagonism, characterizing it as a system whereby women were exploited by men. Additionally, he says, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx defined marriage as a legalized prostitution and a form of female slavery, and argued that abolishing the private family would liberate women from male ownership, the patriarchy, ending their status as mere instruments of production. Various communist theorists, in seeking effective ways to destroy marriage and the family, called for the liquidation of religion, monogamy, and the male-dominated family. Let me say that part again. The male-dominated family. And regarded courses on free love, sexual liberation, and Freud's notion of polymorphous perversity as a revolutionary necessity. The Marxist linking of patriarchy and capitalism, and in particular, its understanding of marriage as an ownership relation ideologically underpinning the capitalist order, has been especially influential in feminist thought, one of whose objectives is the elimination of the distinction between men and women. These pernicious ideas are all at work today in the cultural obsession with sex, the zeal for so-called sex reassignment, and the insensate proliferation of pronominal genders. So, what does all that say? It's basically the idea that men are so evil and toxic, we have to get rid of this patriarchy thing if we want to advance or progress as a society. That's what patriarchy is rooted in. As you say, they even consider it to be like slavery for women, like sexual slavery or something. So,
and it's good that you highlighted the male-dominated family, because that is something that the feminists and society now is definitely against. Like, in fact, it is seen as like a like some amazing thing if a woman, raises her family on her own. Like, it's like, we don't need the man, kick him out, he doesn't play an important role.
Yeah.
And yes, there are some circumstances where the woman has to raise a child on her own because of divorce or abuse, and like, kudos to her. But when women say that they don't need the man and that the man isn't important in the child's life, that's when it gets out of hand. Okay, so that also roots to feminism, because the idea of, women taking over and men stepping down is everywhere in today's society, and it's really upsetting because God intended men to be the head and women to be the heart. Women should be the nurturers and the lovers, and instead they're trying to take over. And that results in so many cons when women try to be men. And there was a radical feminist named Shulamith Firestone, she was a radical feminist, and she wrote a book, and this is a quote from one of her books, just proving the kind of ideas that these feminists have. And it's: male culture was and is parasitical, feeding on the emotional strength of women without reciprocity.
Without reciprocity, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is from the Dialect of Sex, the Case for Feminist Revolution.
Right.
So basically, this all ties into the idea, and feminism is one of the biggest things going on today. And honestly, with how privileged women have it here in America, there's really no reason for there to be feminism. If it was in a place like Iraq or Iran where, women get beat and they're like seen lower than dogs and everything like that, it makes sense. But there's no reason for feminism here in America, because what you're doing is you are taking away the natural masculinity that men was born with and telling them that that's wrong. And you're taking it away from them. And when the women taking over, men will naturally back down. And with women taking over, you're left with so many cons. One of them being in the family, like we're talking about. The men play so much bigger role than you would think in the family. They honestly are the reason their children succeed or not. If a child, I wrote a paper on this about the effects of not having a father in the household. And one of the things that I said was that if a father's not in the household, it affects both the daughters and the sons. And for the daughters, they will literally go out seeking attention from every man they see just to fill that void because they didn't feel loved by their father. And then the son, they will have a loss of identity, not know if they're a man, and they feel just a void in them that they can't fill from that missing father figure. And we are naturally born with the need for a father figure, whether spiritually or physically. And if you take that away, you're taking away the completion that God intended us to have. That's why it's so important to have a male and female marriages like God intended it to, because they complement each other so well. And when you take that away, it's unbalanced. You have to have that male figure. And by women taking that over, not only are you putting down the men, but you are basically just causing all of these problems. Okay, so sorry about that. There was a lot of noise going on in the studio, so we had to fix that problem real quick. So we're going to continue now. Go ahead.
Okay, but anyways, like we were saying, you had mentioned that there was ever increased feminism when it came to like overthrowing the patriarchy and these anti-patriarchal
and how
ideas.
women are overprivileged.
Right. Oh, and you were saying how in America it's not as bad as it could be. Like, obviously, yes, we do want equality for women. We do want women to be treated with respect and dignity, but there is a difference between that and then simply just favoring women over men.
Exactly.
That's not gender equality.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then you can see this, how there's so many different movements and organizations founded on these ideas of men being toxic because they're men. Instead of just being judged by the content of their character, they're judged by their genitals. Right. To say it curtly. But one such example is the recent, the hashtag #MeToo movement, which tries to condemn rape culture, but instead of condemning rape culture, it's just blaming it all on men and just saying men are evil no matter what, and you have to believe women no matter what. Obviously, if a woman comes up to you and makes a claim regarding sexual assault, you need to take that assault seriously. But there's a fine line between taking an assault seriously and then simply being like, I 100% believe you, even if I don't have facts, even if I don't have evidence, just because you're a woman. Which, instead of promoting and empowering women, I must say, that's actually just very patronizing.
Victimizing.
Yeah, because you're playing us out to be victims. Like, what? I'm sorry, I'm not strong enough for you to be able to, hold personal responsibility.
Exactly.
And hold myself accountable for my own actions. If I screw up, I'm going to say I screw up. If I make a mistake, I got to own up to it. I don't care if, I'm a woman or a man. I can do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I got you. I got you to say that.
Girl!
Slap. Anyways. But one such example is, this is sort of like, you could say Hollywood tea or pop culture, but it's relevant in today's society because Hollywood is kind of a microcosm of everything that's going on in society. And it's like, if you want to see these ideas enacted, go to Hollywood. That's where you're going to see it. And recently we saw with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, right, where everyone was just so quick to believe Amber Heard's accusations of Johnny being abusive and manipulative towards her, when in fact it was the opposite. And the jury saw that, the court saw it, everyone saw it. It was the opposite. And this was rooted again in this idea of, just because he's a man, we must believe Amber Heard. Johnny Depp's career almost got entirely ruined. And she totally messed with it. Why? Just because of these ideas that are put in place in today's society.
And a lot of people were actually shocked that she won, just because it's always been the woman instantly wins. Because everybody.
That Johnny won.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're
Yeah,
good.
everybody was shocked that Johnny won because it's always been the woman instantly wins because, she's the woman and everybody believes her.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just good evidence on how overprivileged women are to where, like you said, when they make a claim, everybody instantly believes them. And there have been several courts where the woman was actually the one who was physically abusive, but the man paid the price for it.
Right.
And there are other little privileges, like, i.e., in abortion, the woman gets to choose. The father has no right in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are just so many privileges out there that women get that men don't get because they're women, and yet they still pull the victim card.
Yeah.
And it's actually very insulting for me as a woman that you think you can tell me how I should think. In fact, I've had somebody tell me that I'm not a true woman because I was pro-life. And I'm like, oh, but that guy over there in the female sport who thinks he's a girl
Leah Thomas?
is a girl. Not mentioning names. It's like, I'm sorry, that guy's a girl, but I'm not and it's funny, it's all about promoting women and how amazing women are and stuff until you disagree with what they think and then they hate you. Exactly. Even if you're a woman. It's not women supporting women. It's women supporting the women feminist ideas.
Yeah, totally. And we're not on the abortion topic yet, but there's this thing that I think Dave Chappelle was the one who said it, or he's this comedian on Netflix, and he did such a brilliant job of dismantling the whole pro-abortion argument where it's like a woman saying it's her body, her choice. Mm-hmm. And he was like, okay, you could do whatever you want. Obviously he was saying that as a joke. He's like, you could do whatever you want. If you want to have an abortion, go for it. But he's like, but don't force me, the man, to pay for welfare. It's like, okay, it's not a guy's decision when a woman wants to have an abortion, yet he has to pay welfare when she has a child. And so he put it so beautifully when he was like, if a woman has the right to kill her child, I should at least have the right to abandon them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 100%.
And that is supported by contraception too.
Yeah.
But oh my gosh, we're gonna go into that later because because by contraception you're not open to life and you're basically saying promiscuity, fooling around outside of marriage is totally fine because you can just go have the abortion, and it's allowing men to not stand up and do what they're supposed to and be the father, and it's just like, here, take this and you don't have to worry about it. It's immature, but more on that later because we got 3 more videos to cover that.
We'll cover those in length in the other videos.
So yeah, basically just feminism is totally overrated. There's no reason for it. Seriously.
Nice. I like the way you said that. Yeah, and honestly the way that feminism is even it's even infiltrating the sort of realm, you could say, of masculinity, because we have effeminate men. And it was this video I saw the other day. I think it was an interview between Matt Fradd and this woman whose name I do not remember. We'll put it in the description. But she was talking about the whole transgender issue and how, men, they're being, first of all, women, they grow, and it seems at times that they're being overly sexualized, and they're like, well, I don't want people to over-sexualize me, and they start, trying to sympathize more with, masculine attributes. Whereas on the other hand, you have men who are being told, you're cis white male, you are an oppressor, you are aggressive, you are abusive. I don't even know who the heck you are, but just because you're a man, you gotta be toxic.
Exactly.
And so these young boys, these young men, they start having doubts about their gender identity or about their sexual orientation or their identity because they start to believe, I don't want to be toxic. I don't want to be labeled as toxic. And so they start changing. And even if they don't, identify as LGBT, just the effemination of men that we see in the families in which they're stepping back and they're not taking the role that they have. And so we have a Catholic article called Gender Ideology and the Destruction of the Family, and I'm going to quote for it, that this is sort of one of the neo-Marxist, neo-feminist liberal goals, which is, for them, the family is the main stage of oppression, where the man oppresses the woman and the children, so the family needs to be destroyed through the elimination of the differences among the sexes. And moving further down, this was also said by Shulamith Firestone, that chick you read.
The radical feminist.
Yeah.
The chick.
I'm sorry. I'm from South LA, so I say things like that. So where she says, and just as the end goal of the socialist revolution was not only the elimination of the economic class privilege, but of the economic class distinction itself, so the end goal of feminist revolution must be, unlike that of the first feminist movement, she was part of the second wave of feminism,
Gotcha.
not just the elimination of male privilege, but of the sex distinction itself. Genital differences between human beings would no longer matter culturally. And this is perfect timing, which, well, by the time of this episode being released, it'll be in like a couple weeks. Since What is a Woman premiered. You know, we're at a point in society where Matt Walsh has to go create a documentary to answer what a woman is.
Because women don't want to admit the attributes that God created them to have.
Right.
Like, and think about it. If women actually knew how important and special they were in the eyes of God, like, they are literally, like you said, the pinnacle of creation.
Yeah, like we talked about last episode.
Yeah, and it's just, if they understood that, there would be no need for feminism, because women would know how important and special they are, and how literally society depends on our nurturement.
Yeah, exactly. And so these sort of like gender lines have been blurred because it's like it's been eroding away. They're like chipping away at the stone little by little. So they have, you know, first let's attack masculinity for itself, being like, what is masculinity itself is just bad. So obviously I don't want to be masculine anymore. And if we destroy because masculinity and femininity are like
they balance each other.
Yeah, they kind of balance each other out. They're like on the opposing ends. They, you know, once you destroy the lines of one, or you start eroding at one and chipping away at one, you chip away at the other, naturally speaking.
Exactly.
If it gets to the point where, you know, men who are like, I don't want to identify with masculinity, I'm gonna become a lot more like womanly, or, you know, the opposite end as well. Women decide to become a lot more manly or masculine, whatever that means. And, you know, it goes from saying, oh, you know, gender stereotypes, they don't exist and everything, to the point where just gender itself doesn't exist.
And this is a problem because society needs the natural masculinity.
Right.
It needs that masculine, or it's not going to function. It needs to have the head that keeps everything in. Because it's kind of like, women are just like, I don't want men to protect me, but then when they're going to get hurt, who do they want to protect them? They get mad at the men for not protect. The men are the protectors of the world. We need them to be themselves. And as soon as a man is embraced in his masculine beauty, he can do anything. I mean, obviously Jesus.
Right. Yeah.
Can you imagine if, oh my gosh, can you imagine if he was like told not to be so masculine and not to die for us? Can you imagine, like, what would have happened? Oh God, I've died today. Anyway, so there's a lot we can say about why feminism is wrong, but we don't want this to be too long of a video, so we're gonna move on.
Yeah.
We should make a video about that just by itself, because this is just
so
touching the top. There's so much wrong with it, but don't even get us started.
It's just talking about how, like, feminism and it's tied to, like, breaking away masculinity. Again, you can't have one without having the other. And if we're now at a point where we can't define what a woman is, where a woman can be anything you want it to be, then that itself is a direct attack on masculinity. Right. Because you can't define what a woman is. You know, man is the opposite of woman. If you can't define what a woman is, if you don't have a cogent definition of that, you can't find what the opposite of that is. And
it's very dangerous because it leaves mentally ill people, like, not knowing who they are.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll talk about this in the next episode when we talk about LGBT, but just to clarify what she meant by that is that, you know, gender dysphoria back then was labeled as a mental illness, and now it's being embraced. Yeah, totally. And so you said you wanted to talk about how it's valuable to have men in the family.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, like how I was kind of stating earlier, the man is the structure of the family. The man leads everything. He's in charge of not only providing for his family, but making sure their values are correct in the family. So when you take that away and you have too much feminine, they're not going to be raised the way they should. And there was actually some statistics I heard, and this is just to put in perspective for you. When a man and a woman raise a child in the faith and they die, that child has a 70% chance of continuing to succeed in their religion. If a woman raises a child by itself in the faith and she dies, it only has a 30% chance of succeeding in the faith. However, if a man does it by himself, that child has a 70% chance of succeeding in the future, the same percent as both of them together. That's how much authority and influence the father has on the child. The father has so much influence on the child, and if you take that out of the house, you're basically guaranteeing that it's going to, like, crumble, because it needs that masculine figure to fill. And there have been so many kids who have that void missing, and they're, like we said, they're lost, not feeling loved, not feeling important, not knowing if they're a man, and you send that out into the world, and there have been more suicides from it, and just, it's insane. We need the men in the family.
Yeah, and it sounds like a total, like, slippery slope that we're exaggerating. Oh, you know, you guys are a little dramatic, children of the corn, but there's, like, we're not crazy conspiracy theorists for saying this. This is literally the goal of people who sympathize with Marxism. Socialists, for example. And quoting from a socialist magazine called The Monthly Review. That's right, I went to a socialist magazine. Pray for me. It was scary. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so looking at Socialist Magazine, the monthly review, which says the following about Marxism and its ties to neo-feminism, which says, while Marx's theory remains underdeveloped in terms of providing an account that includes gender is important to understanding capitalism, so they're basically saying they don't talk about gender enough, his categories nonetheless led in the direction of a systematic critique of patriarchy as it manifests itself in capitalism, since he is able to separate out the historically specific elements of patriarchy from a more general form of women's oppression, as it has existed throughout much of human history. In this sense, his categories provide resources for feminist theory, or at least areas for new dialogue, at a time when Marx's critique of capital is coming to the fore once again. And so further evidence of how like the new feminist movement, the new feminist waves or neo-feminism is rooted in Marxist ideas. You have Marx, Shulamith Firestone, again, our favorite socialist. She said, or she wrote in Dialectic, Marx was onto something more profound than he knew when he observed that the family contained within itself an embryo of all the antagonisms that later develop on a wide scale within the society and the state. So yeah, you could definitely see how these are like radical ideas that are being proposed. And it's totally not a slippery slope, because you would, like 20 years ago alone, you would think it's crazy for us to not be able to define what a woman is.
Mm-hmm.
Yet now,
yeah, really,
it's crazy if you can give a definition to what a woman is.
Well, and back then, that's what made society, is that it kind of made society better because women and men had their separate roles and they both played an important part in society.
Oh, yeah.
And when they performed their roles to the fullest, everything was good and it flourished. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there was no disrespect because everybody knew how important a woman was. Well, now she just throws herself at every guy and basically is like a little, like, crazy dog barking at you for everything. It's like, no wonder there's no disrespect for women anymore. There's no respect for women because it's like, these people are crazy. Why should I respect that? Why should I respect somebody who's putting me down for who I am?
That's some tea. Yeah. Definitely. And I think we were talking about this a while ago. We were saying how, you know, just because a man and a woman have different roles, it doesn't mean that one is inferior to the other. And I mean, to use woke terminology, it's just your internalized misogyny that's telling you that if a woman stays at home, you know, that she's not good enough. She's not a good value unless she goes and reaches for something that's masculine.
Yeah.
But then again, on the other hand, masculinity is toxic. So it's like, which one?
So it's like, oh, excuse me, what do you want us to do?
Yeah, and so what would be a more rational approach to the situation? Because we're not saying that toxic individual men don't exist.
Yeah.
We do. There are many, many cases of domestic violence, domestic abuse, of aggressive, abusive men in the households, and of course you should pray for those women, pray for those children, pray for those men, so that they can find God and convert. But there's a difference between that and toxic masculinity. Because I think I was telling Nelly the other day, I used the word toxic masculinity, and she got scared, and she's like, what do you mean?
Yeah, I was like, there's no such thing. I was like, what are you talking about?
And I was like, I meant to say, like, machismo. And that's the thing, like, you know, because, like, I'm Mexican, so in my culture, I grew up with that concept of machismo, which is basically saying, like, if a guy is machista, that means he's very, like, he thinks he's all that, he's very, you know, has too much authority, or, like, he's aggressive and abusive, and he's very, like, he doesn't let the woman do anything. So, like, for example, an example of a machisto guy would be, say you're married, and you have to ask your husband just for permission to go to the store.
Right.
Because he's, like, so strict on you. It's sense. Like, yeah, that's kind of, you know, that's exaggerated.
Yeah.
That's what we would refer to as machismo. But toxic masculinity, on the other hand, and this is something I had to sit down and really think about the differences, because when I was introduced to toxic masculinity, I was raised in California, so when I was introduced to toxic masculinity, I thought it was the exact same thing as machismo. And I was like, oh, okay. But the difference is that toxic masculinity, what it says is that it's like inherently in every single guy. Masculinity itself is bad, instead of just this person is abusing of the gifts that God gave them.
Exactly.
And so, you know, you have people who have seriously suffered from domestic violence and abuse, and And when you have society tell them, well, it's because all men are toxic, of course they're going to believe it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so there's two extremes. You have people on one end of the extreme who are really aggressive and abusive,
Mm-hmm.
but
For
then
sure.
you have people who think that the solution to that is to effeminate our men, and so to over-feminize our men. And so our men on the other side of the spectrum who just kind of stay away from things, or they start questioning their own ideology, their own identity. They start, suffering from gender dysphoria. They don't have as much of an authority in the household. And so really the solution to just, both opposite ends of the extreme are very toxic, if you want to use that word.
Yeah, because there's definitely toxic femininity out there.
Gosh.
Women, let me tell you something. Women can get into the minds of a man and make them do whatever they want. And it's just the way God created us so differently. And women are just like, they have been taking over so much to where they are the toxic people because they are overlording over the men so much, and they can get into the minds and make you think and do whatever they want.
Right, and it's like, I wrote it here, here's the thing, it's a two-way street. The same way that toxic men exist, toxic women also exist. But it's
like our favorite radical feminist that we're
our
talking
favorite radical feminist, Shulamith Firesome. I think we should quote her a lot more.
Yeah, really, yeah.
Just for funsies, funny. We're joking. We're not socialists.
Just to remind us that we're not that bad.
Disclaimer. But yeah, no, it's like, just because there are some men who are toxic doesn't mean masculinity as a whole is evil. Likewise, just because there are some women who are a little bit extra doesn't mean that all womanhood in itself is toxic. And even then, I think a better balance because the people say that the problem is the patriarchy itself.
Mm-hmm.
But when you really look at it, the problem isn't the patriarchy itself. The problem is that we don't have a complete understanding of the patriarchy, and it's not reinstated as God intended it to be.
Right.
And the best way a good patriarchy is when you have a balance between an authoritative man and an authoritative husband, the head of his household, and as well as a nurturing father, a nurturing husband, someone who loves and provides for his children and will support them no matter what. And heck, look at St. Joseph.
Right.
He must have been the perfect example of what a patriarchy is all about.
And like, he stood up. You know how men don't take responsibility for like their children and stuff. He did not know his wife was literally pregnant with a child that he didn't give to, it was not his child, and yet he still believed her and took on that child as his own child, even though it wasn't his. He was the perfect stepfather. We need to take from his example that he believed her and he took care of her and helped her instead of saying get rid of the problem.
I read,
today.
Yeah, sorry. I read somewhere that there was I think it was a saint or a mystic, I'm not sure. But someone had this belief that when they were, when the Holy Family was fleeing from Nazareth to Egypt, that they encountered, robbers along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that they were robbers with bad intentions.
Right, okay.
Think about it. Mary was a young, beautiful woman.
Right, gotcha.
You could just
fill in
the blanks. Fill in the blanks. And Joseph had to stand up and be like, step away from my woman. Step away from my girl, right? Yeah. Wow. Some saints believe that happened. I think it was some mystical visions or something from one of the mystics. But yeah.
And that's the protective head that takes care of his family.
Exactly. That's why.
Can you imagine him being like, I don't want to be toxic and assume that you need help, and then just let her get killed or whatever.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Exactly. And there's again, that's why we have that need for a balance. St. Joseph must have had authority in the family because, if he was the head of the household, especially to everyone, he was Jesus' dad for speaking up, for crying out loud. But on the other hand, he must have been a nurturing father. Who wouldn't have been so nurturing to, little baby God?
Really?
Little baby God man just, growing up. And I think this is something that, to just hone down on why it's so important, why fathers are so important, why masculinity is so important, why the patriarchy is so important, is that, Jesus was, or Mary conceived Jesus, not through a man, but through the power of the Holy Spirit, through the Holy Spirit overshadowing her. She could have very well given birth and just raised Jesus on her own or with the help of her grandparent, of Saints Anne and Joachim, her parents, Jesus' grandparents. But God wanted St. Joseph there.
He said, you need a man to help you.
Yeah, God wanted St. Joseph there. When St. Joseph was about to run away, he could have just been like, what's like this,
drop with you, I tried.
Yeah, he could have been like, oh, we don't need you. But no, God sent angel. He's like, hey, you know what? Son of David's about to make a mistake. He sent Saint Gabriel, or Gabriel the Archangel, to go and reassure Joseph that he needn't repeat the mistakes of David. And well, we can talk about that in a whole other video about the theology of Saint Joseph. I love him so much. He's my man. But anyways,
definitely.
When he said that, don't repeat the mistakes of your fathers, and don't be afraid to take the woman and her child into your house. And from that day forward, he took the woman and the child into his house. If men were not so important in God's divine plan, why the insistence on bringing Saint Joseph back?
Right.
Just think about it. It's so important when, biologically speaking, they didn't need Saint Joseph in order for Jesus to come to earth.
Well, and also think about how Jesus actually referred to God as Father. Think about it, because he was the head, he was nurturing, he was loving, he was the creator of everything. That's why he referred to him as a father, because even though, God's not a specific gender, he referred to him as a male. You're just like, oh.
I was like, what are you talking about?
God's not a specific gender, but Jesus referred to him as a father and as a male because he has the what's the word, the virtues that a man has. He's loving, he's caring, but he's headstrong, he's justified, everything.
Right. God is our heavenly Father.
Right.
And if anything, looking on the face of our earthly fathers is like looking on the face of God.
Right?
Exactly. Like when, I think it was also in the Consecration of St. Joseph book by Father Donald Calloway, which is totally great, totally recommend.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a quote where he says, or I don't remember if it was a saint or a mystic, I don't remember the exact quote, but it was saying that every time Jesus looked at the face of St. Joseph, it was like looking at the face of God his Father, because God had placed St. Joseph in his place. He's like, you're going to raise my child for me.
That's amazing.
Basically. And, and there's also, like, where Jesus loved St. Joseph like his own father. He never said, mama, or, foster father. He said Abba. He called him Abba, Father, because St. Joseph was his dad. Why? Because, God thought it was so important that Jesus have a dad. And St. Joseph was, so important and such a great father that he was a father to Jesus. He wasn't just a, adopted dad or a foster father. Despite not having that sort of, blood lineage, he was his dad.
And that's the way it needs to be in today's society.
Yeah.
They need to step up and take responsibility for their actions.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's just, that's really the way that the patriarchy should be instated. But until, both left and right have that kind of understanding of what a patriarchy implies or what it consists of, then we're going to keep getting both extremes, unfortunately.
So let's wrap this up real quick.
Yeah. Oh, just really quickly, before we're going to be bringing up Marx a lot, because a lot of these ideas are rooted in Marxism. But, just to sort of explain, like, well, what's so bad about Marxism in general? Marxism is actually a positive to the teachings of the Catholic Church. So here's
it's almost
quote.
Satanic.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Here's a quote from the Catholic Case Against Communism. This is Karl Marx saying, "Communism begins where atheism begins." And he framed man as not edified or uplifted by religion, but in a struggle against religion. This is a struggle against the world whose spiritual aroma is religion. This is why people crave religion as a kind of drug. Marx despairingly assessed religion as the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. And again, for Marx, it all begins with religion. That's the foundation that must be raised. Then you have the editor of the Soviet state newspaper, Pravda, Nikolai Bukharin, stating, "A fight to the death must be declared upon religion. Take on religion at the tip of the bayonet."
Bayonet.
That thing. Bayonet. According to Bukharin, religion and communism are incompatible, both theoretically and practically. Communism is incompatible with religious faith, and Pope Pius XI in Quadragesimo Anno said religious socialism, Christian socialism are contradictory terms. No one can be at the same time a good Catholic and a true socialist. So this is just like, we'll wrap up with that, because that's, just keep that in mind when we're asking about why the obsession with destroying the family. We started with how men men are being attacked, masculinity itself is being attacked, and fathers are so important, yet we tend to forget that in today's society because of all these sort of ideologies being proposed. And how, once really thinking about it, once you break apart masculinity and the role of the father in the house, you're leaving an opening to everything else, because fathers are not standing up for their children anymore.
Right.
Because now that's seen as a bad thing. That's seen as toxic, and that's seen as aggressive and abusive.
Right.
And so that's leaving the path opening to other things that also destroy the family.
And that's why we're just kind of trying to explain to you why Marxism was wrong in this, because this is the stuff he believed, and it's wrong, and it's against the Catholic Church
and,
too.
These ideologies rooted in Marxism is anti-Catholic.
Right.
Keep that in mind as we go through the series and answer the question of why people are so obsessed with destroying the nuclear family, and what are the ultimate goals with them doing this.
So we hope we were able to shed some light on this subject. So that was the first. We have 3 more videos coming out on what is destroying the family, but this first one is feminism taking over, the anti-patriarchal idea, and basically just the idea that, men aren't important when they're probably one of the most important things on this earth.
Right. So be sure to follow our YouTube channel, Unveiling the Truth, and follow us on Spotify as well. And also follow our Instagram at unveiling_the_truth_. Stay tuned for the next 3 parts of this 4-part series. They're going to be heavy topics. This is kind of heavy. I hope you guys learned from it, because this is a lot of fun. Honestly,
and like we always say, do your research on it. Like we're just barely touching the top. Go, and if you really want to find out the truth, do your own research on it, and you'll find out that everything we say is actually true.
You don't have to go into socialistic websites like I did, but
and even the Catholic Church teaches that socialism is wrong too. There have been popes that have spoken out against it. So it's against the Catholic Church to have these beliefs.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons we brought it up, because a lot of people don't think about it.
Yeah. So
God, basically, just to end note, God created genders equally. Don't raise yourself above the men. Men don't raise yourself above the women. That's simple.
We have different roles, but that doesn't mean that we're different in value.
Exactly. Just because you're better at painting than I am doesn't mean you're smarter than me. It just means you're better at painting than me.
I'm not better at painting than you.
For the video's sake. So thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed. Like she said, make sure to comment and subscribe. Have a good day. God bless you. And keep that fire burning.
Bye.